So this video is about the process of making one of my arcade machines, which is surprisingly interesting, particularly the changes of direction, the disasters and also serendipity that happens along the way. I don't just sit at a computer drawing CAD drawings. So anyway, to start with, I thought you need to see a video of the final machine in use.
You're going to drive your kids 400 metres to the school at the top, safely protected by your 2-ton, 4-wheel drive SUV. All you have to do is get there without hitting anything. First, choose if you're an advanced driver or a beginner. Now, get a feel for how the steering wheel moves your car, the white one at the bottom. Once you feel confident, press the ignition button and start driving.
I can't miss the cyclist.
You have been awarded a B grade Certificate of Merit as you only had 1 or 2 accidents on the entire journey.
So now, try the politically incorrect version of this game. It's actually much more fun to try and hit all of the obstacles head on. So see how many of them you can flatten with your 2-ton monster SUV. Press the ignition to start driving again.
You're a seriously bad parent. Next time you use this machine, try texting or applying makeup while driving to increase your skill.
So I start with a germ of an idea. In this case, I really just wanted to make a narrow machine because I'm running out of space in the arcades and a narrow machine's easier to fit in and more versatile to move around. So I think I initially thought about space tourism and having a rocket going up. That didn't really go anywhere. Then I thought of a driving game, but realised it'd have to be a very slow driving game because you've only got 6 foot to travel. But that's what reminded me of going to visit my mum, because at the top of her road there's a posh school, and when the kids come out the road fills up with the most enormous SUVs and trying to park and trying to get past each other and stuff. And then the sight of the tiny children inside these monstrous tanks, even the mums look tiny, it's just very funny and it often has entertained me. So that was my starting point. But to really get stuck in, I need some element to start prototyping. And I had no idea how to do the crashes when I started, but I had an idea on the train back from London one day. Often have ideas on the train. And got home and started trying to make a prototype. And this was the prototype that I made. So the idea is that there are these sections of road that tip up 180 degrees. So it can go from the before scene on one side to the after scene on the other. And the shaft of this tipping section, you can just see it here, there's a pulley and a green belt, and if I turn it round, you can see the belt is connected to a motor, a geared motor. So that should make it go round 180 degrees. Oh, no it won't, will it? I'll have to... That's the idea. Now the only other mechanical part in here is this micro switch. The switch is interrupting the current to the motor, but if for some reason this bit of road gets tipped a bit, either by my pushing it down, it then flips. But equally, it can flip when the car hits it. It's the same reason. And there he is, the poor man, flattened. And then at the end of the run, I just put the motor in reverse, and it's all ready for him to be hit again. Well, this mechanism was very satisfying to me because it's simple and potentially reliable, but the effect was better than I was expecting, really. So then I went on to a much bigger prototype for the whole machine. This prototype was to test both the ergonomics, see if kids were the right size to be able to see what they were doing and stuff like that, but also to test the drive mechanism for the car that you'd be driving. One very useful thing I found from this is that with your viewing angle dead in front of the car didn't actually have to touch the road at all. It could be up to 40 mil above the level of the road and still looked as if it was on the road and still looked as if it was crashing into the obstacles. At the time I was thinking of having a great big SUV at the top of the machine, sort of 3D model, but it so reduced the length of the travel that you could drive up by wasting that space at the top that I abandoned it at this stage. These prototypes are useful for all sorts of things that you wouldn't expect or necessarily think about. So after making these prototypes, I felt confident enough to start the final machine. And this always starts with the exterior steel box section frame. Here the photo is taken a bit later and it's painted with red oxide, and everything bolts to this frame. So then I also had to make final versions of the mechanism that supports the car. This is the prototype version, and this is how it turned out. Obviously a lot more solid, but also certainly looks rather more complicated. Here it is in use, moving the car from side to side. There's a couple of limit switches at the bottom, and that little white switch just above that marks the centre position. Then there's also a second motor at the top there, and the point of that is to lift the car up to clear all the obstacles as it returns to the bottom for the next run. So we've now put in all the trapdoors, so they're flipping 180 degrees. We've got one left to do. Very, very fiddly, much more fiddly than I thought. Adjustment is rather crucial. But I've now left them on test. They've been running for 24 hours or so. And so now I've just built the first scene and I'm just about to test it. It was actually very disappointing. I'd completely forgotten that in my original model, the car was just good at flattening things, and I'd designed all the different scenes of different disasters that could happen to all the characters, but really none of them were any good. I had to go back to the drawing board and make flattened versions of them. But at least I've discovered this before I'd carved the lot, so it did save quite a bit of time. They're carved out of gelatong, a wood traditionally used for pattern making. It's straight grained and very easy to carve. But anyway, after about 4 weeks or so, I'd done that and painted them all with acrylic. So finally I could then have a sort of test run. Unfortunately, it didn't work like this when I first tried it. In fact, it didn't work at all. Well, the first thing I found was that I'd made the SUV that you drive yourself much too big. It was actually impossible to avoid the obstacles. This thing was too big and lumbering. So I had to make a much smaller version. And I felt very disappointed because it no longer looked like a monster SUV. Fortunately, my friend Bill was there and he said, "Oh, don't be silly, Tim, people won't notice." And of course he was right. It's very useful to have other people around sometimes. It's so easy to get obsessed by tiny little details working alone. The smaller SUV, it did all finally start to work. You can also see here the tiny little black carbon fibre rods that I added to protect the paintwork of the models. In fact, the car can now only hit the rods and not the actual wood. I realised there was another problem that wasn't obvious immediately, and that was that the car could get stuck on the extreme sides, or if it hit the sides of the obstacles. So I decided really the computer, the PLC, would have to know whereabouts on the track it was so it could do the right thing to avoid getting stuck. So to do this I added two extra sensors. This one is called a slotted opto switch. So if I connect it up, anything that goes in the slot will switch it. So in the machine I made a little comb for the opto switch to pass through. So as it passes through, it's effectively counting up, so the computer has a number then as to which position it is across the track. You can see the comb here. You can't actually see the sensor, it's hidden below. The vertical motion, I used a slightly different one. And this one is called a diffuse opto sensor. So there's an LED in one side and the opto sensor in the other. So if I hook this one up, this will just detect anything that's immediately in front of it if it's close enough. So it's detecting my finger there, but if it's more than an inch or two, then it won't detect it. So for the vertical motion, I had a strip of aluminium and just some insulating tape that I ran along, and then cut the insulating tape into stripes, if you like. So now when this passes along, it counts how high up it's got, and it counts back down again as the thing goes down. So it's a sort of map of where the thing is. The downside of this is that it makes the PLC program more complicated. It's not too bad writing it. Debugging it can be a bit of a problem, but the worst thing is trying to remember exactly what I've done 5 or 10 years later, even if I've written notes. With the machine getting more complicated, I decided to abandon one earlier idea, which I thought was central to it. I thought the kids should be asking you questions while you drove up the track to distract you. But really I decided that was one thing too many. And very often when I'm making the machines, I get to a point where I have to simplify everything. And usually it doesn't really matter very much. So once I've got all the motors and the bits and pieces in, I can then start to wire it all up. And there are a lot of wires in my recent machines, as you can see in here. But one thing that's really helped is this multi-core. So it's a 25-way, and each wire is a nice different colour. So I run this multi-core out to different parts of the machine from the control panel, and then split them open into the separate cores for the final stage. This neatens everything up, but also I always leave some spare cores so that near the end of making a machine there are always extra things that need fitting. But this way I don't have to add any extra wires, they're already there. Telephone engineers do this, so there's always spare wires on the line. So of course all the wires come back to the PLC, the relays, the power supplies. You can see there's quite a lot of complexity in it all by the end of it. Just for up and down motor, side to side motor, and for the scenes you end up with quite a lot of stuff. Then, oh yes, down here is the bright sign. That's what plays the video and the audio. This is the same on all my machines, so although it used to be a real fiddle to get it to run, now it's fairly automatic. So with all the wires in place, I could finally program a test program to see how it all worked. And the sad thing is, it was very, very disappointing. It's actually very boring running the car up, avoiding all the obstacles. Nothing happens. I don't know why I hadn't thought of that. It was several days before I thought to even try running the car up and crashing into everything instead. And it was so much more fun. So of course it's obvious really, I've just been very naive. So it's now been on the pier for about 3.5 years. And after the usual teething problems, things coming loose and adjusting the tension on various belts and things, it's been more reliable than most. Had no trouble at all with those fiddly encoders. They seem very reliable, and mostly they've done their job. Though when I opened the machine up today, I found this woman in the bottom. She got knocked off beside the green car near the top. So things are never quite perfect. These machines are always prototypes. But mainly, I now quite like it. It's particularly the anarchy of encouraging kids to crash into everything. I now see it more as a sort of celebration of political incorrectness than about the 2-ton monster SUVs. And I always feel very proud when I see a parent or a grandparent encouraging their kids to mow down everything in sight. Something very satisfying about it.